The last word of the book of Ruth is David. Not Ruth, not Boaz, not even God, but David. And that single word changes everything about how we read this ancient love story. Today we're diving deep into the book of Ruth to uncover its hidden theological treasures, specifically how this Moabite widow's story reveals Christ's redemption plan, the kinsman-redeemer motifs that point directly to Jesus, and how Ruth herself becomes a picture of the gospel going to the Gentiles. By the end of this episode, you'll see how every detail in Ruth's 4 short chapters connects to the grand story of salvation. So let me bring in someone who's spent years studying these connections. Help me understand, why does that final word, David, matter so much?
That's such a brilliant observation to start with. According to Mitchell Chase's research in the Southern Baptist Journal of Theology, the book of Ruth is the only Old Testament book with a genealogy in its closing verses. And here's the thing, the content of that genealogy may be the whole reason the book of Ruth was written.
Wait, so you're saying the entire book exists just to get us to that genealogy?
Exactly. This 4-chapter drama leans forward. The events weren't reported for their own sake, they're heading somewhere. The story resolves in chapter 4, but it's still going somewhere bigger. From Boaz and Ruth's line will come David, and, in the fullness of time, David's greater son.
So we're not just reading a nice story about loyalty and love, we're reading about God's providence playing the long game.
Precisely. But to understand how deep this goes, we need to start with the legal framework that makes the whole story work, the kinsman-redeemer system. This is where it gets really fascinating.
Okay, break that down for me. What exactly is a kinsman-redeemer?
The Hebrew word is goel, and according to the Bible Project research, it means a close family relative who restores people or property back to their original family after they've been sold due to extreme poverty. But it's actually a 3-part obligation.
3 parts?
First, property redemption based on Leviticus 25. Second, levirate-like marriage to preserve a dead brother's line from Deuteronomy 25. And third, protection of family life and blood avenging from Numbers 35. The goel had to be willing, able, and related.
And this is exactly what we see playing out in Ruth chapter 4 at the city gate.
Right. In Ruth 4:5, Boaz tells the nearer relative, "On the day you acquire the field from Naomi, you must also acquire Ruth the Moabitess." This shifts the transaction from a mere property matter to the full covenantal role of goel. The nearer relative was willing to buy the land but not marry Ruth.
So he wanted to cherry-pick the profitable parts while ignoring the vulnerable widow.
Exactly. And here's what's remarkable. Archaeology actually backs this up. Nuzi tablets from the 15th century BC and Alalakh texts show land plus marriage clauses almost identical to Boaz's demand. Scripture's cultural precision is incredible.
That's wild. So this isn't just ancient storytelling, it's historically grounded legal practice.
And it gets even more interesting when you realize what this twofold obligation accomplishes. It reunites title, the land, and seed, offspring, so inheritance remains tied to the deceased's name. It safeguards Naomi and Ruth economically, socially, and spiritually inside Yahweh's covenant community.
Okay, so now I'm starting to see the bigger picture. But how does this connect to Christ? You mentioned type and antitype earlier.
This is where it gets really beautiful. The research consistently shows that valid typology requires 2 elements, historical correspondences and escalation between the type and antitype. Boaz perfectly foreshadows Christ as the ultimate redeemer.
Walk me through those correspondences.
The goel must be a relative. Christ partook of the same flesh and blood according to Hebrews 2:14. The goel must be able to redeem. Boaz had means, but Christ's sinless life and divine nature provide infinite worth, as 1 Peter 1:8-19 tells us.
And the third requirement?
The goel must be willing. Boaz volunteers, but Jesus, according to Hebrews 12:2, for the joy set before him endured the cross. So Ruth 4:5 anchors a messianic shadow culminating in the cross and resurrection.
That's incredible. But there's another layer here that I think people miss. Ruth herself as a picture of the Gentiles coming into God's covenant.
Yes, Ruth is a Moabite, a Gentile, who makes that famous declaration in Ruth 1:16, "Your people will be my people and your God my God." She's literally being grafted into Israel's covenant community.
And this connects to Paul's olive tree metaphor in Romans 11, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Paul describes Gentiles as a wild olive shoot grafted into Israel's cultivated olive tree to share in the spiritual blessings and promises. Ruth becomes this beautiful Old Testament picture of that New Testament reality.
So Ruth's story isn't just about personal redemption, it's about the expansion of God's redemptive plan beyond ethnic Israel to include all nations.
Exactly. And according to Ephesians 2:1-13, Gentiles were separate from Christ, excluded from citizenship in Israel, and foreigners to the covenants of the promise. But now in Christ Jesus, those who were far away have been brought near through the blood of Christ.
Ruth literally embodies that transition from far away to brought near.
And here's something fascinating from Brian Korn's doctoral research at Liberty University. Ruth's placement in the Hebrew Bible is actually different from our Christian Bibles. In Judaism, Ruth is part of the Megilloth collection, and its chronological order places Ruth as the solution to Proverbs 31:10's question, and an excellent wife who can find.
Wait, so Ruth is literally the answer to that famous question about the virtuous woman?
That's the implication of the canonical ordering. But there's an even deeper layer. According to Arlen Chitwood's analysis, the Book of Ruth contains a wealth of information concerning the church, with the central focus on Christ and the church, not just God and Israel.
How so?
Chapters 1 and 2, along with the first part of chapter 3, relate the complete history of the church throughout the present dispensation. Chapter 1 centers on salvation by grace and two types of Christians. Chapter 2 focuses on Christian activity throughout the dispensation.
So Ruth becomes this complete picture of Christ and the church from Pentecost to the Messianic kingdom?
According to this interpretation, yes. The first part parallels the New Testament epistles, while the latter part parallels Revelation chapters 1, 5, and 19. Ruth presents the entire arc from the church's inception to Christ and his consort queen exercising regal power.
That's a pretty bold interpretive claim. But even if we don't go that far, the typological connections are undeniable.
Absolutely. And what makes it even more compelling is how the genealogy ties it all together. The union of Boaz and Ruth produces Obed, who fathers Jesse, who fathers David. This makes Boaz a significant figure in the lineage leading to King David and ultimately to Jesus Christ.
So we have this beautiful convergence, the kinsman-redeemer motif pointing to Christ, Ruth representing the Gentiles being grafted in, and the genealogy connecting it all to the Messiah.
And here's what Jennifer Matheny's research in Currents in Biblical Research shows. Ruth's scholarship has evolved from historical critical approaches to interdisciplinary methods that emphasize these very themes: gender identity, ethnic borders, and migration narratives.
So modern scholarship is catching up to what the text has been saying all along.
Exactly. As one scholar put it, the more time I have spent with the book, the more convinced I have become that it is exceedingly complex and ambiguous. Ruth is deceivingly simple, yet incredibly sophisticated.
Which brings us to the practical question: how do we apply this? What are the reflection questions we should be asking ourselves?
Well, first, how does Ruth's journey from outsider to insider challenge our understanding of who belongs in God's family? Her declaration, "Your people will be my people, and your God my God," represents a complete identity transformation.
That's powerful. What else?
Second, in what ways do we see Boaz's character as kinsman redeemer reflected in Christ's work for us? He was willing, able, and related. Christ embodies all three perfectly, but on a cosmic scale.
And the third?
How does understanding the type-antitype relationship between Boaz and Christ deepen our appreciation for redemption? It's not just about individual salvation, it's about restoring land, lineage, and life, both temporally and eternally.
Those are really challenging questions. And here's what strikes me: this isn't just academic theology. This is about understanding our place in God's story.
Exactly. The text models protection of the marginalized, male responsibility toward kin, and holistic redemption that's both material and relational. Contemporary parallels appear in church welfare systems and Christian adoption ministries that mirror the Goel ethic.
So Ruth's story becomes a template for how we should live and care for others.
And it validates God's providential orchestration from Moabite widow to King of Kings. As the research shows, Boaz obeys Torah, Ruth embraces Israel's God, and Yahweh rewards covenant loyalty with fruitfulness.
There's even archaeological evidence supporting this, right?
Yes, Moabite King Mesha's 9th century BC stela mentions land inheritance language similar to Ruth, grounding the narrative in real geopolitical practice. This isn't mythology, it's history with theological significance.
So when you step back from all this, what's the big takeaway? How should this change how we read Ruth?
Ruth 4:5 crystallizes the multifaceted role of the kinsman redeemer, restoring land, lineage, and life, prefiguring Christ's cosmic redemption. Every detail in this story points beyond itself to the grand narrative of salvation.
And Ruth herself becomes this beautiful picture of what happens when someone from outside God's covenant people chooses to embrace his family and his promises.
Exactly. She embodies the ingrafting of the Gentiles that Paul would later describe. Her story shows that God's redemptive plan was always meant to include all nations, not just ethnic Israel.
Which means every time we read Ruth, we're not just reading about ancient Israel, we're reading about ourselves and our place in God's family.
And that genealogy ending with David? It's pointing us forward to the ultimate David, Jesus Christ, who fulfills every type and shadow, every promise and prophecy.
Here's what I want you to do after this episode. Go back and read Ruth again, but this time look for Christ in every chapter. Ask yourself, how does this point to Jesus? How does Ruth's journey mirror my own spiritual journey from outsider to family member? Because here's the thing, that last word, David, isn't really the last word at all. It's pointing us to the true and greater David, who redeems not just land and lineage, but souls and eternity. Thanks for joining us on Co-Pilot Podcast.